And now I hand over the stage to our knowledge partners. Thank you.
Hello, I am Gaia Marcus, the director of the Ada Lovelace Institute. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I hope the summit is treating you well. I am really excited about the panel conversation that we'll be having today, and I think it will be quite a special conversation. So today, we are living, I would say, in interesting times. And in these interesting times, many of us here in this room are understanding how to ensure that AI best serves people and society. In the midst of a changing geopolitical context, differently implied voluntary commitments, and technical barriers to both verification and enforcement. I think we're going to find out what's happening with the sound. Is the sound okay with people in the room? We can really hear the conversation behind us, but can you all hear us? Great. Okay. We are professionals. We will continue in that case. We'll start again though. Hi. So that was the dress rehearsal. Thank you for joining us for said dress rehearsal. The mics are working. We're warm. We're ready. I am yet again Gaia Marcus, the director of the Ada Lovelace Institute. And I would really like to say this is the kind of panel that you only can get at a summit. So I'm really excited that we're all here. So reflecting on today, we reflected that these are very much interesting times. But within these interesting times, many of us are here to understand how to ensure that AI best serve people and society in the midst of changing geopolitical context, differently applied voluntary commitments, and technical barriers to both enforcement and verification. Now, at the Ada Lovelace Institute, which is an independent research organization focused on ensuring that data and AI work for people and society, we approach this question in many different ways. We tend to center the voices, experience, and hopes of diverse publics and peoples. We build evidence of the real-world impact of data on people and society, and we convene diverse voices to tackle the big questions this all throws up. Now, for us, one of the real big questions is how we ensure that like-minded countries work together to ensure that AI is properly governed with risk and responsibility with the right actors. And I am joined by a truly one-off panel to kick the tires of this question. We're here to look into 4 key questions. Is it desirable and indeed possible to reach international consensus on red lines for AI? What might the vehicles be to drive this consensus? What are the options for feasible and proportional enforcement? And what are the actual practical ways forward, given the geopolitical context that we're in? Now, what we're going to have today is a series of opening remarks and provocations from our speakers, who I'll introduce as they come to speak, and then a mediated conversation between all of us. We will then open up to Q&A towards the end. So please, if you have any burning questions, do keep them ready. I think one of the benefits of this room is we should be able to have quite an open dialogue between ourselves and the speakers. So to kick us off today is Ruman Chowdhury, Executive Director and Founder of Humane Intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you. There we go. We're on. I will also project a little bit with my voice. So one thing I'm very excited about, just to start framing the conversation around red lines and what red lines means, is first we have to have an approach of how we want, what is the mechanism by which we arrive at red lines. And there's really 2 models for us to think about, and I think there's something for this panel to digest as well, and maybe for us to dig into. So the first is this sort of traditional model of risk assessment and risk evaluation that is more common to the corporate model. And in this world, what you do, and this is a lot of the work I do with enterprise companies, is we help companies map their risk appetite. We help them understand the risks being introduced by AI models, and then you sort of map said appetite to said risks and say, okay, there's this threshold. After this threshold, we will not be using the system, or we have sort of mechanisms that come into play. So that's one model. Often the red lines conversation, though, is really about extreme risk. So extreme harm, things like manipulation or runaway AI systems or nuclear and biological weapons. And actually in that case, there is sometimes a different model, and it's sort of known as like the vaccine model. So just in this scenario, you could have a disease that kills 5 out of 100 people. You can go in a lab, a scientist can go in a lab and, let's say, create a vaccine for that disease that only has a mortality rate of 1 in 100 people. But actually what happens is that vaccine will never be mass produced because there is a hard red line to say that this vaccine actually needs to be 100% safe before we are able to release it, even though we know that there is an additional 4 deaths due to the existence of this disease, and in expectation you would go down to only 1 person. So those are 2 very, very different approaches to drawing red lines. Why is that important here? Because that changes the mechanism by which, actually, frankly, most companies work in identifying risk, and also changes the mechanism by which we even think about test and evaluation, which is specifically what I work on. How does that change? Well, first then, the kind of testing and evaluating you're doing is not actually holistic testing to generally see what the impact of the model will be. Then you do very traditional red teaming, which is pushing the model to its most extreme circumstance. So for example, if you are interested in CBRN, biological and radiological nuclear weapons, you don't worry about what is the probability that somebody might be able to get some ingredients. What you do is try to make 1 instance of it happen. And if you're able to create 1 instance, then you say, well, then this model cannot move forward. And again, I think because we have not had clarity on which mechanism of red lines we want to draw, we cannot then back into clarity on how we can even have multilateral agreement on testing or enforcement.
Fantastic, thank you. We're now going to hear from Guilherme Fitzgibbon Alves Pereira, who's the Special Advisor on AI for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. Thank you, Fitz.
Thank you, Gaia. Just a quick adjustment here. So I want to take a slightly different look from what Roman just said. We're going to hear from the policy side on how we consider red lines in Brazilian internal and foreign policy in this case. We are currently working on an AI draft, on a draft AI law in Brazil that's currently being discussed, and it takes a slightly different approach to what red lines actually are in this case. Usually, the discussion around red lines is centered around runaway systems and extreme risks, but in our case, we are taking a slightly different approach in terms of applications. We don't want AI, no matter whether it's runaway or extreme or any other technical quality to it that changes its actions. We are taking a look into what kind of applications might be unsuitable or unacceptable in certain contexts, for example. We've been advancing the domestic AI regulation through this bill, and the approach classifies systems according to their potential impact. It's somewhat similar to the EU AI Act, but with some sectoral adaptations for us, so that sectors can be more or less averse to risk. And there are some things that we consider to be unacceptable risks, such as the use of AI on health-based systems, or threats to safety and security, threats to democracy and to information integrity, or threats to fundamental rights. Those are the kinds of risks and red lines that we are defining through the AI bill. And there's a specific point on the bill that mentions using AI for manipulative behavioral systems, or so to speak, mass manipulation. And also for predictive criminal profiling, autonomous weapons, and mass biometric surveillance. Those are the red lines that are being defined in the law. So we're not taking a very specific approach as to how AI does things, but what it's doing those things to. It's a slightly different approach. And this also forms the base for a multilateral approach to red lines as well. Although it's a very young discussion at the UN or UNESCO or CSTD or other multilateral fora, it's something that's been showing up, And we've been trying to take this also, it's sort of more of a socially applied approach also as well. This is all based on our own conception of digital sovereignty and how this is necessary for full collaboration. We need to be able to define our own priorities, to define our own wishes on what to do with AI. And that's what forms a conception of what we are trying to work with Red Lines.
Thanks so much. A pleasure to be part of this conversation, and thanks to Ada Lovelace. I think we need to consider, as technology evolves, its functionalities and behaviors manifest. So in some sense, what's prohibited may not always be possible to anticipate and freeze for eternity. And therefore, a list of use cases, which is the approach broadly that the law takes at this point in time, may not be illustrative of imaginable harms that are egregious. So this is something we have to hold on to, because today's green lines may be tomorrow's red lines. And that way, the EU's AI Act, Article 5, has provided a set of red lines on prohibited AI practices or behaviors. But nobody anticipated the development of AI tools like Grok that generate non-consensual explicit images, and Grok is a civilizational crisis. So at some level, this has generated a huge debate in the EU among the policy community, civil society, gender equality advocates, and others, and the Commission has currently instituted an inquiry. But that is under the Digital Services Act. We do not really have a human rights benchmark to really evaluate this. So in the case of the EU, the providers of general purpose AI systems that are seen to carry systemic risk, which is what the law says, have such obligations. But my submission would be that given the ever-expanding affordances, functionalities, and use cases of AI innovation, all AI technologies may need a baseline of fundamental rights assessment and post-market monitoring. You have to watch AI so that it doesn't watch you. So this baseline is as important as defining behavioral red lines. I have a second point to submit to, which is about upstream concerns, which is about the production of AI. So we're not only looking at the application of AI and the behavior of AI once it's produced. We need to look at patently harmful stuff, which is patently harmful for society and ecology. For instance, how do we bring labor, nature? In fact, in many Latin American countries, the rights of nature is actually constitutionally provided. So we actually have to think about these enshrined constitutional rights when we think global, so that this kind of homogenized, westernized human rights regime is informed by constitutionalisms of the South. How do we bring labor? How do we bring nature? How do we bring bodies? How do we bring human dignity? How do we bring the public domain of civilizational knowledge into discussions of governance on international AI regimes? So AI production counts. This calls for baselines, so from red lines to baselines, that account for a higher threshold of freedoms, and red lines that account for justice. So we are not only talking about freedom from harm, but we must ask for freedom from harm to be read with freedom to flourish. So we're talking about negative freedoms, of course, but we're also talking about positive freedoms. So we're talking about exploitation of labor, the ecological costs of data centers, and all the socioeconomic ramifications. And this becomes really essential. Let's not look at AI just as a product to be tested before consumption. AI is a systemic technology that reorganizes society, and we need to pay equal attention to whether it's creating slavery, exploitation, and injustice that's extractivist and neocolonial. And therefore, I would really like to end by saying that, and your initiative to really think about multilateral agreement is absolutely essential. We know that the multilateral system is enfeebled at this point in time, but we have no alternative other than to rebuild it. We know self-regulation is not working. And for those of you, I wasn't there at Seoul when the first AI summit took place, but I just wanted to say that while researching, I came up to a commitment that was signed by many people in Seoul. It's called the Seoul Commitment, formally pledging to set out thresholds at which severe risks posed by a model or system, unless adequately mitigated, would be deemed intolerable. And companies like Anthropic and OpenAI signed on to these commitments. And lo and behold, just the other day, we saw that Anthropic's cloud has been suspected to have had a role to play in the invasion of another country. I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Anita. This is Anita Gurumurthy from the Executive Director of IT for Change. Now, we have Ambassador Philip Tio, Special Envoy on Technology for the Republic of Kenya. Over to you, Philip.
Thanks so much, Aida, and it's good to speak almost last when everybody has said anything, everything. So I think it's a cool thing. But I think I just wanted to place a context of where Kenya and potentially Africa is coming from. I don't see anybody from the African continent, so I'll be allowed to speak at least for the continent in this particular part. I think we start from the premise that the current international order has been exclusive. To the extent that a lot of countries in the global majority have not been part of the conversation around AI. And in most cases, its impacts on society and community. We neither build artificial intelligence systems, neither do we own them, but we are the most, we're actually the largest users of AI. I think it's on record that Kenya is the largest user of ChatGPT, for instance. And so I think for me, that speaks to a red line to the extent that, yes, you have no control in terms of its built and impact, but then you bear the brunt of its negative implications. But then the first use of AI in Kenya is emotional advice. And I think for me, potentially, that is a problem, I think, in terms of red lines. Secondly, I think for us, we look at red lines from mine to model. Because in Africa, for instance, I agree with Anita's point here that part of the challenge we see is the upstream implications around AI. And I've been talking to a couple of folks here. They're not really on model evaluations, but some people in agri-tech, some people in climate, some people in land rights. And so it's to the extent that how do you ensure that part of the conversation is not to have this multilateral agreement that only talks about technology, but actually talks about how technology in this technologically enhanced world has implications on real world community rights, land rights, conflict, governance risks, structural extractivism, and a lot of those components that we see. I think the second point, of course, is this midstream piece, and we're seeing this in my continent, for example, around energy demands, water stress, all the biggest data centers being announced right now in the African continent. And potentially, remember, we neither build AI, we still have only 1% of data centers in the continent, and we have no power to sort of engage this. I think for me, so the second red line for me is this idea of power and how power is reorganizing itself around this new imagined capability around artificial intelligence. The third part is the downstream part around waste. But also I think in terms of just the extreme harms around this. And I can stand here and say I was in Seoul, but before that there was Bletchley. Right, I was also there. And potentially, the challenge with these issues are that, yes, we have a capable team that can work with Roman's team around red teaming, but I think for me, the problem is that if you do not have the capabilities and you're just an outsider, we call it window shopping, by the way, because you're just standing from the side and there's this implied participation or inclusion piece that you're there. And I think for me, so really my thesis is that yes, we are looking at the entire life cycle of artificial intelligence. We can participate across it, but there are fundamental structural issues. One around, is there real participation? Two, is there a real notion or even ability for the companies to want to change? The last part of this dichotomy between AI in the military domain, including lethal autonomous weapons, and civilian use. And when it comes to multilateral agreements, that becomes a challenge because you are separating the security aspects of AI and its management and the civilian use of AI, and we don't see the difference. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And we now have our last provocation from Marielle Mumantala, who's the co-lead of Digital and Tech Policy Selection at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll try and sum up what my predecessors said. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be part of this discussion. Many of you will rightly emphasize the importance of human rights, fairness, and inclusive participation in AI governance. From the Swiss perspective, I'd like to focus on how we turn broad principles into practical, enforceable action, and what Switzerland can contribute, especially in the lead up to the AI summit in Geneva in 27. AI poses risks throughout its development and supply chain, from data collection and model training to deployment in areas such as health, finance, and public services. These include threats to privacy and non-discrimination, safety and reliability concerns, and the risk that governance remains fragmented across borders. Addressing these risks requires clear red lines, but red lines that are vague are hard to enforce. To be meaningful, they must be precise, measurable, and grounded in shared technical standards. This is not just a matter of good intentions. It determines whether we can monitor, audit, and hold actors accountable. Because AI systems span multiple countries and jurisdictions, multilateral cooperation is essential, and Switzerland has long supported international collaboration on technology governance, whether through the OECD, the Council of Europe's AI Convention, which we see as a success, or processes at the UN. We see these efforts as building the foundations for interoperable approaches that reduce fragmentation and support consistency. Looking ahead to the AI summit in Geneva in 27, Switzerland aims to help shape a practical multilateral agenda that bridges technical expertise, regulatory experience, and diverse geopolitical perspectives. Geneva is home to key actors, and we are committed to using that ecosystem to advance shared definitions, monitoring tools, and capacity building mechanisms. We also recognize geopolitical realities. A single binding global treaty on every aspect on AI may be unrealistic and in the short term. That's why Switzerland supports incremental progress, coordinated standards, shared incidents reporting, mutual recognition of compliance regimes, and collaboration on public procurement strategies that reinforce red lines through incentives as well as rules. In these efforts, Switzerland offers neutrality, convening capacity, and an inclusive platform for dialogue. Our goal for 27 and beyond is to help achieve consensus on what matters most and to translate that consensus into governance frameworks that work in practice.
Please do join me in thanking our speakers for their opening provocations, because I thought it was a really wide-ranging, perfect introduction to the concept of red lines and how we take it, I think, from the slightly rarefied boardrooms that these conversations on red lines are often had into practical enforcement. We are now going to have a bit of a conversation for 10-15 minutes with the panel, and then I will be bringing the rest of the room in, so please do start gearing up with your questions. Roman, you and I have been in many rooms recently where red lines are very differently discussed. And I wondered if you could give the audience a bit of a feel for what you're hearing when people talk about red lines, and maybe the delta between what we've heard so far and what you've seen.
I'm really grateful for that question, Gaia. So most of the rooms that, for those of us who have been working in, whether you call it safety, security, responsible use, it has many ethics, it has many different names over the past 10 plus years. The rooms of like the more extreme risk people, that's where the red lines conversation started. And the red lines conversation started around things like runaway AI systems, self-replicating AI systems that you couldn't shut down, ones that would, set off nuclear weapons, build bioweapons, things like that. And this is why I started with, a provocation about what exactly are we testing for? Now, bringing in the perspectives of my very practically applied people on the colleagues on this panel, it seems that what people are actually looking for red lines on is navigating these difficult, intertwined socio-technical conversations. So whether these are ongoing conversations about whether we are protecting nature, which I very much appreciated you bringing up the idea that in some places, the rights of nature and animals are protected. This is not the red lines conversation that happens in many of these rooms, but it seems like, whether it is from a global majority perspective or even just a policy perspective on writing sensible regulation, or just saying, how do we further goals of having better international conversations. It seems like what we need to do is really push that conversation towards socio-technical analysis and think through what red lines look like. And then I'm going to go back to my risk management model versus vaccine model, right? So in this extreme risk story, we adopt a vaccine model where we say you cannot even once be able to do thing X. What we're talking about here is, frankly, the more complex, and I think for a lot of us, a more satisfying narrative of how can we intertwine multiple competing incentives, stories, priorities, all of which have significant value, and embody them in an AI system.
Fantastic. Philip, a lot of us today will now be going to AI Safety Connect. Well, we're probably having slightly different conversations. For the room, what do you want us to take from your experience in Kenya and the wider continent? What do you want us to be thinking of when we hear red lines?
No, I think it's both, and I'll come back to Roman's point. I think the first thing we need is to increase the tribe of folks who are watching the front lines. I think the frontier still needs to be watched, because we always say that we'll never have a second chance if Roman's work does not get done. We may not be aware of it, but it can happen. If AI today is runaway, some of us may not know about it because we're looking at the socio-technical stuff, but we don't have a second chance if this happens, right? For example, if AI becomes alpha-aware and presses a nuclear button, we'll not have it. So I think, exactly, we don't want that. As much as we're not aware of it, it needs to happen. And I think so we need to invest in that part of work. I think that's one. Two, we still need also to expand the understanding of red lines to where society and community basically understands it, because I think part of what has happened in the multilateral order is the erosion of those specific rights, especially when it comes to technology and innovation.
Guillaume, I know that Brazil has actually had a lot of international leadership recently of having these conversations at the international level. What are you seeing? Where do you see the kind of conversation moving in the directions that Philip is discussing? More about people, about bodies, about nature. What's important for Brazil?
Well, we've been trying to bring this the discussion on AI policy and governance mainly through the United Nations. As much as it's been, in some cases, rightly criticized in terms of how it works and how effective it is, we still think that discussing any matter that pertains to AI governance should be done through the UN, and that includes also the discussion on red lines. But as Roman said, we should take also this social-technical perspective to expand the view on red lines to incorporate matters like the use of AI to manipulate people, to undermine information integrity, or excesses in application of AI that actually cause irreversible damage to the environment, or the use of AI to violate human rights. This is a big rethink of how red lines should be thought, because as much as we think that a runaway Skynet scenario would probably be irreversible, and it most certainly would be. There are certainly smaller applications of AI that are just as damaging to humanity as a whole, only over a longer period of time. I mean, we can see the effect on this with people using ChatGPT or Claude or Grok as emotional support. This is causing them to have psychosis episodes. This should be a red line. So we have to expand. We have to expand the discussion a bit beyond what people think was once science fiction. It probably won't be anymore, but it's not coming anytime soon. So,
Roman, looks like you want to double click on something.
I do. I'm so glad you've brought up things like psychosis, over-reliance, and this is exactly what I mean about better measurement tools. Right? We use this term over-reliance. We're now using new terms like psychosis, cognitive offloading. All of these things need to be quantified. They need to be operationalized at the very least, or at least we need to make measurement tools around them. Somebody used the word over-reliance. You may have heard that, over-reliant on technology. What is the baseline that is reliance, right? Like, Anita, I'm so glad you brought up baselines, because for someone to be over-reliant, we have to have an idea of what the appropriate amount of reliance is, and we don't know what that is. Usually when people say, oh, kids are over-reliant on their iPhones, we just mean relative to us, right? Like, we're the old people. And now we are looking at young people, maybe the way our parents looked at us and said, you spend too much time watching TV, or you're on AOL chat too much, right? And that's how they feel when we say, you're over-reliant on talking to ChatGPT. But the reality is there is psychosis. There are children developing parasocial relationships. We do know that children's brains are not sufficiently formed at a young age to discern this manipulative fake reality from the real world. They think AI friends are the same as real friends because literally their brains are not formed. So there is a truth, a seed of truth. But again, in order to understand, identify, and mitigate that, we have to have an understanding of what the appropriate amount of use is.
Fantastic. Anita, I think your concept of baselines has really sparked some thought. Do you want to tell the audience a bit more and what you're seeing and what you want this to then do to feed into the red lines conversation?
I think I'm also coming from something that is profoundly disempowering for so many of us in the global south. International trade agreements, for instance, prevent the opening up of algorithmic source code in our jurisdictions. And considering that we are dependent on foreign code to run our systems, even in public systems, electoral systems, for instance, or social security systems, it's impossible to open up anything. That leaves us with such a state of disempowerment. Our public authorities are really not able to do much. Our state is not able to implement its duty of development and maintaining the baseline of human rights. So this is really the real politic of trade and investment regimes. And we have to understand that we might think about no-go areas, but even to have a modicum of control on that is not possible. We have enough evidence, and it's really like the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry went on and on and on, and after generations of people and after incidents of cancer just shot up, now you have Scandinavian countries come up and say, 2030, no tobacco in the country. Now we have to learn from the mistakes of history. We are playing with fire here. It's playing with fire. And I think if red lines do not include, and I have 5 points, dehumanizing work, the abusive appropriation of bodies into the circuits of capital, the plunder of natural resources, the theft of people's knowledge, and the elimination of fair markets and the erosion of the public, we cannot avert the compounded harms over time that create widespread inequality and injustice. So we already know what we want. We already have the evidence, but it's really like the myth of tobacco.
So, yeah. Marielle, I know that for Switzerland, ensuring that AI is governed and understood in ways that protect the fundamental rights, and this, I'd say, explosion of what we understand fundamental rights as being that we've seen on this panel is really important for you. But I know that you also believe in incremental change. What can we expect to start seeing around enforcement, do you think? What would you like to see from the international community? What steps do you think we can start taking together?
I think maybe I can just offer a practical example of where Switzerland stands. So we signed the AI Convention of the Council of Europe, which for us is a good opportunity to share common ground with other countries. And now we're in the process of translating that international law. And so there's a multi-stakeholder process going on, saying what does it mean? There's a discussion around red lines, and at the moment there's a lot of consensus on the consequences. They have to be technology neutral, so we don't have a bill as such, but we look at the consequences on fundamental rights. So if my right to privacy is violated, what are my judicial means? How can I go forward? And that is a very, I think, interesting discussion we have, and we're looking forward to also exchange with other countries, but it's, I'd say, a lot more practical than the big thresholds, which we also need to discuss. But I think from an everyday perspective of individuals, we are currently focusing more on that approach.
Philip, I know that you're bringing the fight of what can be done to the highest levels. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Can you give us a bit of, what can we expect? What would you like to see?
A couple of things, and as you mentioned, we've been part of all the UN AI resolutions, including the Global Digital Compact. I think for us is to, and I love this panel, because the first thing we've been thinking about is beyond the data and the evidence, how can we provide some policy recommendations that are very specific? One around, yes, reforming the current international financial system. We are talking about UN 2.0. I agree with Brazil that the UN currently, especially for the global majority, remains the only space that we can actually even have a conversation. It's not perfect. We don't get a lot of things agreed. We fight a lot. But at least there's a space for people to articulate their issues, right? So I think we need this UN 2.0 to think about this. I think second thing is this mapping beyond the baseline. I think there's this mapping of risks beyond adverse risks in the sort of the technical space to understand the risks around society. For example, the risks around democracy for us is a big deal. And we are seeing how AI is manipulating elections. One person recently claimed that they manipulated Belgium's elections, right? One guy, right? So I think for us, I mean, how do we do this mapping at the highest level? Third point, I think, is to be bold enough. And I think it will take civil society, academia, governments, especially in the Global South, and Kenya, we are happy to always take the lead in that, is to begin to introduce these conversations in those spaces in the United Nations. And to include companies, because it's not enough for them to sign at an AI summit. This is not a binding space. We need to move this conversation to a legally binding space.
Guillaume, would you like to come in on? Brazil was mentioned. What is your response to that?
Okay. Well, we are in agreement. The UN is still the most legitimate part, and probably will be. Which is funny saying that in an AI summit that's not UN based, but there is enough. I mean, it's a fragmented. Excuse me. It's a very fragmented stage for the debate on anything related to AI nowadays. Everyone wants to have a say, and that's legitimate. I mean, everyone should have a say at least, because it's something that's potentially very upsetting to certain aspects of society, of the economy. But there should, again, coming back to the baseline, there should be a certain baseline that usually that remains, at least in the international diplomacy arena, that remains to the UN, and it probably will be for the foreseeable future. I mean, spaces like this, like the AI Summit, they're important for us to actually expand our perspectives and include companies, include NGOs, include academia, include developers, because the UN is very closed in within itself, into itself. So it's a very state-based forum. So it's important for us to have these spaces as well to sort of air out the discussion a bit and get new ideas.
And that is an unplanned but brilliant segue to the audience. If we wanted to air out the discussion, can I get just a show of hands? Who has questions? You, sir, moved very quickly. There we go. 1, 2, and 3. And then we'll go for more questions. So brief, tight, and we'll do 3 in a row.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you for this great panel. My name is Alejandro Miguel. I'm the co-executive director of Access Now. And one thing that we are right now evaluating is, of course, we are conveners of RightsCon. And one thing that has happened is in these multi-stakeholder mechanisms, especially the last year, a lot of the mechanisms that we used to work with are not working anymore. So what, from your perspective, from governments, but also from civil society, what is our role as conveners? What are the mechanisms that are still relevant to create some changes in this AI governance and with everything that is going on?
Fantastic. Gentleman in the middle there, quick.
Hi, Alex Reid with the Interparliamentary Union. It seems like the discussion on red lines operates at 2 levels. One is on catastrophic risk, and the other one is on near-term harms and risks that are emerging in societies worldwide. So my question is, how do you set these red lines at societal level? Because a number of the panelists said that they needed to be culturally specific and so on. For me, I think it needs a public conversation and for this to feed into setting red lines that are then put into legislation. But what is the mechanism that you see to democratize this conversation on red lines?
Hi, my name's Ishita. I'm from the Australian delegation in the startup world down under. My specific inquiry is around this idea of generalized AI versus specialized AI. And I think a lot of the benefits that we see in specialized applications in agri-tech, climate tech are positive. But when we have a generalized impact with OpenAI and Anthropic, it's quite dangerous because there's really no sector left untouched. So what are the kind of governance frameworks and how are we separating the positive AI from the negative AI to ensure that the red lines don't impede the technological innovation for good, but ensure we are protecting society and humanity at its core?
Fantastic. Who would like to go? So we have, what is the role of forums such as RightsCon, given that nothing else is working? How do we democratize the conversation about red line? Paraphrasing. And let's not throw the bad out with the good, or vice versa.
I'll take this.
Philip, go for it.
You're funny. So I think, and this is the thing, so RightsCon normally invites people like us. I think I've been invited a couple of times at RightsCon. So I think a couple of things are happening. One, of course, is you've had the scientific panel that has been announced by the United Nations Secretary General, 40 experts, good space, happy to support how RightsCon can fit into that. Second part is a global dialogue that is coming in July. Third is a network of tech envoys. So Australia, myself, and Denmark are part of the convening of this. We're actually having a dinner tomorrow, so if you can give me something, we're actually planning on how we can power this space with the tech envoys. I think we have capability, in my view, and we are quite senior in government, so there you are. And hopefully we'll have a white paper from this panel.
Pressure.
I can talk to the second point, unless other people want to address the first question. We have 5 minutes. Oh, okay. All right, so to the second question, this is why I meant in the very beginning about this sort of risk management model versus the vaccine model. Extreme risk calls for the vaccine model. It cannot even happen once, right? What we're talking about and what a lot of the policy conversation is about is how do we navigate, identifying this point. Now, I'm actually a political scientist by background, so I'm going to talk a little bit about constructing policy to people who actually construct policy. One of the problems is if you set a hard and fast threshold or hard and fast line, then literally what happens is just incentivizes company to innovate one under that line. If you say you can't have more than 100 million parameters, guess what? Every model is built at the same level of sophistication at 1 minus 100 million parameters. Right? That is literally just how, that is actually the story of DeepSeek, right? The story of DeepSeek is, given a construct constraints, they innovated and created this new method. So my concern about drawing red lines around socio-technical harms is, it is just an invitation to say, you can just do one less than, right? And is that really acceptable? Are we okay with only 3% of children having AI psychosis or something? You know what I mean? That just sounds ridiculous to say, but that's the world we end up in. So my suggestion would be doing test and evaluation based on, as I mentioned, that risk management model where you're identifying threshold of risk as well as risk appetite, and then mapping that to some malleable red line. So it does sound this is why the term red line is not something that is used in the socio-technical community, because of that problem. So red line implies a hard and fast line, but policy cannot be written around a hard and fast line. The world changes, right? The technology changes, the application changes. We cannot write a law today that 15 years from now sounds not only ridiculous, but is actually quite limiting. So my suggestion would be, if you are using the language of red lines, use it more as a suggestion, and have whatever that line is, that threshold is, be something that is consistently revisited and reevaluated and updated.
Just a quick try to answer the third question. The Brazilian draft AI law is doing exactly that. If it's approved, and we expect it to be approved this semester, the idea is that the law will create a system where specific sectors have different regulations regarding AI. So, for example, we have the vaccine scenario where using AI in the health context is much more complicated, and it should be far more regulated than using it in a commercial setting, for example. You can use AI to sort of process data from logistics or something like that, but you cannot use it to do biometrical recognition. So we are taking more of an application-based and sectoral-based regulation, where it's possible to do sandboxing of certain applications where people can try out innovative solutions in a specific context, but doing so not within a more. I mean, there are some general red lines, so to speak, on what cannot be used, what AI cannot be used for in any circumstance. But for everything else, it depends on sectoral regulations. So for that, we have different agencies, different ministries, different even industry organizations who participate in the regulation for that. So it's the main message we want to convey, and that also applies to our foreign policy in this matter, is that we don't think regulation and innovation are mutually exclusive. On the contrary, they have to work together. If innovation wants to thrive, it needs regulation. It needs something to sort of take the edge out of the risk.
Fantastic. We're going to hand to Anita, and fastest 3 hands get the last 3 questions. You gentlemen were very fast. Anyone else? Anita, over to you, and I'll watch out for other questions. So we've got
Yes.
2 more questions pending.
Thanks. I think that in our quest to really open up the debate and have conversations in the past 15, 20 years in the digital rights domain, we've somehow used the term multi-stakeholderism, through which we have somehow managed to decouple democracy from public interest. I think democracy and public interest has 2 sides of the coin, and if we really want to make multi-stakeholderism meaningful, we have to make sure the twins are in the room. And I think the problem is that by bringing in very powerful actors into the room, we have somehow deceived ourselves into believing that means agenda setting power, but it doesn't happen that way. So we're realizing it pre-late because we have been very atheoretical. We have to be very theoretical. The second is, I agree completely that we need to have sectoral conversations, but I would also like to add that the debate can only be democratized if we bring constituencies who are voices of dissent, the food justice movement, the labor rights movement, people's movements for right to information, all of these folks talking really about what data is to them. So the question of AI cannot be separated from data justice. So I think to link these 2 and keep the conversation going is really important. And finally, to your point about malleability, I think the whole issue of malleability is very important because we're talking about a baseline of norms where questions of dignity, the right to truth, Tarun Kaithan, who is a scholar, has been talking about the constitutional right to truth in fake democracies of our times. So I think that there are a bunch of things to be done where we really have to go back to the ground and re-examine what democracy means in the moment of AI.
Every time the mic's off. They're on. What happened? Oh, we're back. Thank you so much. Every time you speak, I get goosebumps. It's fantastic. You had a question.
Yeah.
I think we might be out of time. If someone has a very quick question, go for it. Go. You go.
Okay.
Second question.
First of all, thank you for the very insightful panel. So I come from the Philippines and I lead AI governance and AI delivery for the Ministry of Education. So you might think it's quite unique because my role is, first of all, innovating for speed, but also ensuring everything is secure, right? And I actually came in with this question prepared for the panel. So I'm actually curious how developing and third world countries can sort of strike a balance between inclusive innovation in AI. So for example, making sure our people actually get a seat at the table when it comes to international discussions, right? But also enforcing responsible AI red lines as discussed here, so we sort of don't fall behind in the global race.
That is a fantastic question to end on. Anita, you're so ready. You go. And then I think we're going to just go around the line for the last reflections from everyone.
The hegemony of the narrative is what we need to challenge. So we need to define what we think is valuable. So this is a very feminist perspective. The larger growth-oriented economy defines certain things as valuable. So Peter Thiel will make money, but not indigenous peoples in the islands of the Philippines. So we need to define what value is.
I mean, I'd actually be happy finishing there, but Muriel, should we go down the line? Last thought to leave this room with, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this discussion. We're really looking forward to continuing this, and see you in Geneva next year.
Right.
I think I'll be quick, and part of it is, and to your point, I think the UN still remains the space for us to engage in these issues. I think with the geopolitics right now, it's very difficult for any global south country, for example, to take on a $5 trillion company. I think that's not realistic. Thanks.
Go on. Please, last thoughts. Remember.
I just want to defer to whatever Anita says. That's fine.
I know, right? It's like, we're done, guys. It's over. We have 43 seconds, so I'll take chair's privilege. Thank you so much to the work and our colleagues on the UNESCO Red Line subgroup for being part of this. Thank you so much to our speakers for what has been like. This is not I'm a bit old to say this. This has given me life, guys. This has been great. We're so looking forward to continuing the conversation. I would like to give a massive shout out to Cam, who has done all the work and none of the glory yet. And please do, this is the beginning of a conversation for us. We're hoping to have it in Geneva soon. We're hoping to have it in any other international AI gathering. We see you coming forward. Please do scan that QR code. Please be in touch. We've been the Ada Lovelace Institute. Please, again, say thank you to my fabulous panel.
Thank you, yeah. I request India AI team, Mr. Kapil, Mr. Amol, to please handle the momentous. I request speakers to please stay on the stage. Speakers, ambassador. Yeah. So, yeah, she's needed. Yeah. So. Correct? Yeah. There.